Harry's Wife, Part 93.1. 10 people Harry's wife should really fear. Threats 10 through to number 8. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. A little while ago I published a video which was about 8 people that Harry's wife should fear. And it was based upon an article that had been created by a particular news outlet. This provoked considerable interest, and of course in the comments demonstrated people that agreed with the selections offered by that relevant author and people that disagreed. A variety of opinions that were advanced. I explained that I would be offering my view on the 10 people that Harry's wife should really fear. And here it is. Before we get into who is who on this list, it's important to make a number of things clear. First of all, Harry's wife is a narcissist, as I have established through extensive evidence previously. She is not a psychopath, and therefore she does experience fear. She experiences anxiety, and she has the capacity to fear the individuals on this list. We've seen in video evidence where the clenching of the jaw, the furtive looks, the sweating, the responses that she has given demonstrate that she experiences anxiety and fear, and her narcissism will generate that in certain instances to cause her to behave in a particular way as a motivating factor to ensure she seeks the prime aims. In the same way that the narcissism might ignite her fury, cause her to view someone with contempt, be infatuated with somebody, to be envious of an individual, to hate an individual. The narcissism creates both a feeling and a mindset so that she is motivated to act upon it with due expedience to seek out the prime aims of fuel control, character traits, and residual benefits. And fear is but one of those aspects. Accordingly, with these individuals, should her narcissism apprehend the threat that this individual poses, it may well generate fear to cause her to respond. In other instances, of course, it could cause her to act in an arrogant or dismissive way. But the purpose of this is to identify that these are 10 people that she should really fear. Whether she actually will do so is a matter for her narcissism. But viewed objectively, these are the individuals that are in the top 10 of causing a problem for her, and therefore she should really fear. How have I gone about establishing how these people should be in this top 10? Well, you'll find no boozy principles here. There is the application of cold, hard logic. And what I have done is that I have analysed various people and others outside of the top 10, hence they didn't make the cut, to determine whether they should get within the rankings of the people that should be really feared. The relevant criteria are: what damage could this person cause to Harry's wife? What do they know? Have they got the evidence? What is their reach? Is this person that has an extensive reach already in place? Or are they somebody that would have to have that reach created by somebody else and therefore they're reliant upon another vehicle? What might motivate this person to cause a problem for Harry's wife? What are the things that would cause them to act? Similarly, what demotivators exist to cause them to be less likely to cause a problem for her? And what's their level of effectiveness? I.e., what is the sit-up-and-take-notice factor? Will people listen to them, or are they less likely to do so? Those 5 criteria have been carefully applied to all of the individuals on this list. And therefore, I have carried out considerable work with regard to those on the list and others outside of it, because doubtless there'll be people who think, HG, why didn't this person appear on the list? Well, they might have been ranked number 11 or 12, so they have been considered. Of course, I'm not going to at this juncture say who they are. to avoid spoiling it for you as to who our 10 actually are. But understand, more than 10 people have been considered, hence why it's taken a little while to prepare this material for you. And on that basis, you ought to show your appreciation for it by not only liking the video, sharing it, but scrolling along and exhibiting your super thanks. A lot of work has gone into this to determine who should be looked at in the first place, and I will tell you now that 25 people were on the shortlist. They were all ranked, and these are the top 10. Accordingly, settle back, prepare yourself, as we now delve in to who is on this top 10, starting with those in the positions of 10 through to 8. Number 10. The childhood friends. Individuals such as Ninaki Priddy, Simon Burns-Dilly, Lindsay Roth, and persons unknown make our entry level into the top 10. These individuals know Harry's wife pre her fame or infamy, dependent on which way you look at it. There are those that put her behaviours down more readily, because they don't understand about narcissism, to essentially having her head turned by fame, money, status, etc. They are unfamiliar with the fact that she is a narcissist and how her narcissism has worked. Accordingly, her father, for instance, believes that she's changed as a consequence of her admittance to the royal family. And there'll be many people who may swallow that and say, well, it's understandable people do change when they get huge amounts of money, that they're very well known, that they're elevated in status, that they have lots of people running around doing things for them. It's difficult to resist turning into a bit of a twat. However, what the childhood friends can do, of course, is pose a problem for Harry's wife by unmasking her behaviours that existed prior to her involvement with Prince Harry and the royal family, demonstrating that she has always been somebody who has functioned in an entitled manner, that she has been unaccountable, transparent, that she lacks emotional empathy, that she's manipulative, and so forth. Those like Ninaki Priddy were also present, of course, during her various relationships, and therefore have the capacity to detail what has happened in those relationships and cause a problem. For instance, the treatment of Trevor Engelson. The childhood friends have the capacity to explain how she really lived and behaved back then, as against the revised history that Harry's wife now puts forward. For instance, just take the example of the Sizzler salad, Recollections. This group have the capacity to drop Harry's wife in hot water by talking about the way that she behaved back then, underpinning the narcissistic behaviours, also demonstrating that the way that she has described her childhood isn't the way that it actually was, and of course dealing with matters more when she was an adult vis-a-vis the relationships. Accordingly, they may have information, for instance, about the alleged hazing incident that took place. They could have information about the way that she's behaved towards them, the tantrums, the ghosting behaviours, the popping them on the shelf and no longer having anything to do with them. And therefore, because it's something they've experienced, they have the first-hand evidence of all of that. Of course, they have a slight difficulty with regard to whether they actually have evidence beyond that of just witness testimony. Do they have texts and emails, photographs, videos, and so forth that would be more damaging than just their testimony alone? Their reach, of course, is problematic. None of them have major platforms. They're essentially regular citizens. They could, of course, speak to the press that would take an interest in what they have to say, but they don't have major platforms that they could utilise themselves. They're not famous people. What are the motivators that would perhaps cause them to be more likely to dish the dirt on Harry's wife? Well, first of all, quite simply the way that they've been treated. The way that they may have been the recipient of tantrums, the fact that they've been kicked into touch, and Ninaki Priddy being an example of that, which has already caused her to speak out. It might also be money, the fact that they could make some money by issuing certain disclosures about her behaviours. It might also be the case that there's disapproval of her conduct. and quite possible moral condemnation, that they feel motivated to say, we don't agree with the way that she behaved, and we're going to say as such. Demotivators, well, they may still continue some kind of misplaced sense of loyalty and think to themselves, well, she was once a friend, and therefore it's not appropriate to speak out about certain things. They may also adopt the mindset of, well, it's in the past, and let the past reside in the past. It could also be that they might have been approached and they're signatories to non-disclosure agreements, which will shackle them with regard to what they have to say. In terms of their effectiveness, they're relatively low with regard to the sit-up and notice factor, primarily because people may dismiss it as childhood envy, that it's just their word as against Harry's wife, and of course there have been disclosures that have been made already, and it may well be the case that they have nothing fresh to say. Nevertheless, in terms of overall potential, they do have considerable capacity to be problematic. They know where some of the bodies are buried, and may well have clear and direct evidence of that. But since many of them have already spoken out, and they may not actually have any new revelations that they could put forward, they could find themselves just being attacked for being envious. And these factors, plus reach issues, see them placed at number 10. Number 9. Prince Harry. We all know who he is, and therefore he needs no introduction. We all know that he's the Prince of Pink Pancakes, or Ginger Bollocks, and of course the Spare. His damage potential is huge. As the abused intimate partner primary source, he's lived it, and therefore could provide a blow-by-blow account, subject to ensuring that he's got the right cranes to hand, of how he has been treated. Many of you will be familiar with victim memoirs about the abuse that they have suffered, and they're extensive in detail. Much of it is almost lasered into the brain of the victim. Dates, occurrences, what happened, what was said, where it took place. Of course, there'll be certain instances that Harry might not recognise as abuse, but over time that might come to the fore. And therefore, with him being somebody that spent a huge amount of time with her over a number of years, is able firsthand to recollect precisely how she's behaved, what she's done, what she's said, what she wanted, what she offered, the way that she has manipulated, coerced and cajoled. He has been up close and personal to the action, and in those circumstances is in a position to provide a wealth of material. He may well possibly be able to provide video footage, he may be able to provide pictures, messages, emails, and therefore not only has he experienced it, he has the evidence to support it also. He, of course, is in the sustained devaluation, and therefore he will be the recipient of lots of different manipulations, silent treatments, triangulations with other people, potential infidelity, flirtation with other individuals, use of threat, demeaning conduct, belittlement, invalidation. There's a whole raft of behaviours that he will have experienced. He will have found himself being flattered. He'll have found himself subjected to lies, future faking, triangulation with objects, triangulation with person. He might even be the recipient of physical violence. There'll be instances of provocation, projection, guilt. There'll be the revision of history, argumentativeness. He'll have been told he's not good enough, the isolation that's experienced, the false promises that is being issued towards him. There'll be a raft of material that he is able to access. So his damage potential is huge. What about his reach? Well, his reach is extensive. He's a royal. And therefore, he's always going to attract attention. Furthermore, one of the issues is that there's a willing audience that wants to witness Harry's wife's comeuppance at the hands of the Ginger Prince, those rooting for him to strike back, having been victims of abuse themselves, and therefore they want to see him getting one over on her, and also the very fact that even those who are not victims of the abuse, who simply don't like her, want to see her get her comeuppance from the very person that has been right next to her. Accordingly, there will be considerable interest to ensure that her comeuppance at the hands of the Ginger Prince is witnessed both through the formal and social media, so the reach would be extensive. What about motivating factors? Well, it may well be the case that his heightened emotional thinking corrupts his truth-seeker trait to cause him to want to expose her to the world. This is what I've had to endure. Not only did I lose my mother in tragic circumstances, this woman came along and promised she'd protect me, and then she did the opposite. And therefore he feels a huge sense of betrayal. It may be also, of course, that his emotional thinking corrupts his narcissistic trait of pride, that he wants to get revenge on her, that he can't believe that he fell for the spicy poontang and the lies that were issued towards him. Possibly money would be a motivator. He'd likely earn a considerable amount as a consequence of writing a book about these events. It may also be the case that his empathic trait of justice is corrupted so that he believes that it's the right thing to do. Furthermore, his narcissistic traits of resentment and anger could similarly be corrupted. He resents the way that he's been treated, he resents the fact that she has behaved this way towards him, and he feels bloody angry about it. So a motivating factor may well be money, and also the presence of emotional thinking corrupting various of his narcissistic and empathic traits, which moves him to the exposure. What about demotivators? Well, the largest one is that he may well still be under the control of Harry's wife to the extent that he doesn't realise what's really happened to him. And therefore, even though he realises that he's not happy, the extent of her manipulations is such that it prevents him from acting upon the information that he has. Similarly, he may not just wake up. Even though she kicks him to the curb by way of disengagement, he doesn't truly see what's happened to him, and is therefore not motivated to take any action to expose her, that he may still love her, and therefore doesn't want to harm her in that regard through a misplaced sense of loyalty. A huge factor will be the children, and his empathic traits of compassion and decency, and the guilt that he would feel at behaving in a particular way towards their mother, is one that is likely to demotivate him from taking action. Many people who are the victims of abusers want to bring about their comeuppance, but are often restrained from doing so because they realise, well, I'd be hurting the mother or father of my children, and therefore don't take that action. There's also the possibility that royal protocol prevents him from doing so, that the palace steers him away from taking some action because it would seem to be damaging to the royal brand, and rather would focus on, at least you're away, there were differences between the couple that came to a head, and now he's in a better place, and it's a focus on his recovery. And that becomes the story, rather than creating hatred and continuing to attack her. Furthermore, it might also be that his emotional thinking acts as a demoting factor in terms of compassion and care for her, that whilst it's misplaced, the emotional thinking causes him to believe that he shouldn't act in this way, and in the circumstances, he doesn't take action through exposure. What about his effectiveness? Well, this is mixed. First of all, will he be able to remember everything? He's not the brightest individual, and much of the evidence might go missing, or he's a little bit confused with regard to recollection and being able to provide it in a coherent fashion. So there's that issue. Also, people will listen, but he may find that he actually has an unsympathetic audience from many. You knew what you were getting into, you're just as bad as her, poor little rich boy, and many people who think that he's complicit with her rather than being a victim, and simply don't want to hear it. There may also be the risk of oversaturation, that people are quite simply sick of hearing about him and his wife, and therefore don't have any interest in what he has to say. Overall, he has huge damage potential and reach, but there are significant demotivating factors, and the mixed effectiveness by which his disclosures would have means that his threat level places him at number 9. Number 8. Jason KNAUF. Jason KNAUF joined the royal household as communications secretary and became Harry's wife's personal secretary. In terms of damage, he was a trusted confidant and party to repeated communications, meaning that he has access to many of the bodies and Also, just as importantly, he can actually lay his hands on actual evidence, something that he exhibited with his emails and text disclosures during Harry's wife's litigation against Associated Newspapers Limited. He likely knows a lot more about what was said, what was done, the manner in which it was conveyed. He landed 2 damaging blows by demonstrating that she had basically forgotten about certain emails, or rather, chose not to use them, dependent on which interpretation you prefer, and also demonstrated that she has an involvement and an authorised disclosures of information to the improbably named Omid Scobie and the now in hiding Carolyn Durant with regard to the publication Finding Freedom. He demonstrated that she was either forgetful or, as most people have chosen to accept, that she lied. And those were damaging disclosures. It's likely that he has more. And therefore, there is substantial damage potential. What about his reach? Well, KNAUF's reach is poor. He's got no media outlet, he doesn't have a social media platform, and unless he decides to write a book, which media outlets, of course, would take an interest in, he's no real outlet to rely upon. What about motivators to cause a problem for Harry's wife? Of his own, well, possible personal integrity might cause him. It may well be the way that he was treated by Harry's wife, joining a long queue of people who've been mistreated by her, causes him to want to exact some form of revenge, or that he deems that as a matter of personal integrity to make these disclosures about her. Of greater motivating factor would be encouragement by the royal family. He's loyal to the royal family, and if they decide that they require him to act, he will do so. Money might be an issue with regard to, for instance, a book deal, but he would be looking, of course, to have the blessing of the royal family to do so, and they hold considerable sway over him. He still, of course, works for William and Kate, and he might be utilised by them if they feel a need to counter what Harry's wife does, and this is more likely as a defensive measure rather than going on the attack against her. In terms of demotivating factors, the royal family again appears here. If the royal family say no, he won't do so. He kept stum because of the royal family telling him so, and only moved with the disclosures because he received the approval of the royal family to take such action. One very substantial demotivating factor is the potential for there to be collateral damage against Prince Harry. If the royal family are focused on protecting him, then she may be unscathed by KNAUF's potential for further revelations because of the risk of collateral consequence to Prince Harry, and the royal family not wanting that to be the case. Irrespective of the anger that he has created, and it's something that will be addressed in further parts of this particular part, 93.1, there will still be an element of sympathy and support for Prince Harry and, of course, his children. In terms of effectiveness, given his revelations in the Associated Newspaper Limited case, it's clear that if he speaks out, people will take notice, albeit he has already issued disclosures once, which could generate a degree of staleness. It very much depends on the nature of the disclosures in themselves. If they're along a similar line, people won't be as interested, but if they're fresh and different disclosures, then they're more likely to sit up and take notice. KNAUF certainly has the potential for explosive and problematic evidence, but reach issues and a substantial demotivating factor, meaning that the royal family may not okay it and he will listen to that, means that he makes the top 10, but at the outer reaches. Thus, we conclude the first part, going through numbers 10, 9, and 8. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section as to your observations about these individuals and their potential. And get yourself ready as we move on to the next 3, going through positions 7, 6, and 5. I'm HG Tudor. Make sure you like this video and make sure you share it. Thank you for listening.